And then after that, there will be the questions that you've all submitted this evening, questions that the candidates have no prior knowledge of at all, and so hopefully slightly scary for them, but I'm sure it will be very interesting and entertaining. I'll just begin by introducing each of the candidates who are here this evening. Owen Patterson for the Conservatives. He was elected as the Conservative MP for North Shropshire in 1997, and his previous roles in government have included being Secretary of State for Northern Ireland between 2010 and 2012, and he's also Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs between 2012 and 2014. We have Duncan Kerr from the Green Party. Duncan was elected to Oswestry Town Council in May 2013. Previously he lived in Derbyshire, where he was a Green Party councillor on Bolsover District Council. His background in local government, and currently works as a children's social worker as well as running an arts centre. Graham Curry is representing the Labour Party tonight. He's a qualified social worker. He and his family moved to North Shropshire 10 years ago, and he runs his own independent social work business, and that operates right across the West Midlands. He's also a member of Christians on the Left. For the Liberal Democrats, we have Tom Thornhill. He had his first experience of politics at the humble age of 7, when he spoke at an event to protest at the closure of a local hospital. And he now volunteers at that hospital, serving drinks there and helping patients. He grew up in Whitchurch. He's age 20 and he's a student at Birmingham University. Last but not least, for UKIP, we have Andrea Allen. She's a former teacher, translator, interpreter and secretary. She moved to Shropshire in 1974. She's chairman of the Town Twinning Association, and she was elected as a parish councillor in 2013. She's been involved with the local community and is a member of Whitchurch 21. Thank you. So we'll begin with these questions that have been submitted by the Senior Citizens Forum. A couple of them are quite long, so but we'll start off with question 1. Given that all main political parties propose to join health with social services, please detail how your party proposes to consolidate these two aspects while preparing the UK for an expanding and ageing society, presumably with reduced funding. So we'll kick off with Owen Patterson.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming. Wonderful sunny evening, and you've all spent £2.50 to hear us lot, so I hope we give you good value. And I would also, just by the way, like to thank Jeff and all his team for making us all welcome, because this is a fantastic facility, and it's a real I'll be quite brief, because I think the discussion's more interesting, and I'm not absolutely sure quite what's behind this question. I think the premise isn't quite right. I don't think every single party is saying that health and social service should be integrated. What we're saying is there should be more coordination. There's obviously a very interesting experiment going ahead in Manchester, where the services will be wholly coordinated under local control. The government set up a fund for better integration worth about 3.8 billion. And I think here in Shropshire, we've had a really interesting example of this working. I've talked to Keith Barrow, the leader of the council, pretty frequently, and Karen Norton, who leads the CCG, and I've seen a marked improvement due to this coordination. In simple terms, they've set up a coordinated, integrated team. So if there's an elderly person who has a problem, the first thing actually is to stop them going to hospital. We know the real what you don't want is for elderly people to go to hospital. It's much, much harder to get them back into normal routine. So there's been a real drive to keep people at home, and I think one of the real achievements of the council, which we should all admire, is there's actually been a 50% drop in people being admitted to homes. So care at home is a really key part of this. But then I think there are 3 steps. One is rehab. The teams work together, so your social service and health do an analysis, see if it could be better rehab, and then an analysis of where they should go next. And having been the MP for 18 years, I've seen a significant reduction in correspondence. It's wholly anecdotal, it's wholly unstatistical, I'm fully aware of that, but I'm just getting fewer emails, phone calls, frantic letters from people who've had a problem. And this winter does seem to have gone smoother, and they've learnt yet more lessons. I talked to Karen not long ago, because I have regular 2 monthly meetings coordinating all the providers of health in Shropshire. And they've learnt, you know, they're going to do better again next winter. So I think Shropshire's a really good example of a CCG that has grabbed the opportunity to use its independence and to deliver care on the ground related to local circumstances. Of course, they're not easy in Shropshire too. Delivering health across a wide, thinly populated rural area does have its problems. So just to repeat, I don't think it's not the absolute intention to amalgamate both. There's clear indications. I've had a very quick squint at our manifesto this afternoon. There's a clear hint, a clear statement actually, that we want to see more coordination. There's not a clear drive to bring them closer together, and I think that would be a mistake, because I think you do want to keep social care in the hands of local authorities. I think they are better clued up on how to handle it. But it's absolutely the right thing to do, as happened in Shropshire, to create joint teams that provide coordinated care, coordinated analysis, and from my point of view as an MP, it has delivered benefits.
To concur, how much of that do you agree with?
Not a lot, probably. I've worked in local government since 1978, and that's a long time, isn't it? But in that time, we have had talks and talks and talks about integrating healthcare and social care. I've run out of labels to describe all the local area agreements, partnership funds, and every government has said we want to integrate those. But they also have said we want health to be in trust. The Labour government gave us a trust status for hospitals, which drove them out of integration. The Tories have given us privatisation. On one day in March, just a couple of months ago, a contract for £780 million was signed for the private sector to deliver healthcare. That doesn't help integration either. And this is just some academic argument about whether they should be integrated. I've worked in the hospice and was disgusted, frankly, to find that a significant component of my job was arguing with health over who would pay for a particular patient. And the scandal was, one day we had a crisis because a patient who had been discharged, he met the criteria for health funding, and then health would say, he's lived too long. Our criteria meant that he should not have had this life expectancy. And so there was going to be a meeting to argue about the funding for somebody who had been discharged in that way. And that is a scandal, because all the effort and all the costs going into that are not going into meeting that person's needs. And that's what we should be focused on. So 3 things I think are actually necessary to crack this and make it happen rather than just make it better. One is free social care for the elderly. If Scotland can do it, why can't England do it? And it's that barrier of having contributions for the elderly who have to pay which gets in the way of integration. So the Green Party is committed to free social care for the elderly. The second thing is actually joining those organisations together at a local level. Manchester has been proposed. I actually worked just over the border in Wales, in Paris. Paris is proposed by the Williams Commission to become an organisation that delivers both health and social care. Wales is a bit easier because they haven't had some of the dreadful reorganisations of health services we've had in England. So they've still got health boards, they've still got councils on those health boards they can bring back under local control. But thirdly, and this is probably the most contentious, we do need to move from a national illness service to a national health service. And what does that mean? It means properly investing in preventative health care. £1.3 billion are spent every year because of the cost of our inefficient housing. Old people are dying because their homes are not properly heated and insulated. And that, again, is something we are committed to overcoming. That not just saves money, it saves misery and costs. But we've got a whole society, this is the WHO's term for it, which rewards unhealthy habits. We've got a society that's full of drinks, food, and obesity epidemic and diabetes, and we can't cope with that as a society. So we do need taxation policies which encourage people to be healthy and makes that affordable for people and discourages those things in society which puts people into hospital. So those are the 3 things we need to make this work.
All right, okay. This question's a bit of a difficult one for me because I feel the other candidates are going to be at a bit of a disadvantage because I spent a whole career trying to work out how we can integrate health and social care. And for the first time, what I'd be saying to you is that actually Labour Party have got an offer that is actually a genuine way forward. Andy Burnham and the extremely competent Labour health team have put together something called a proposal for a national care service. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few seconds, but I'll give a little bit more bit of background. I mean, I came to Shropshire in 2003. I did work I was employed by the council, Shropshire Council, but I based within what was the PCT. And we were looking at how we can develop services. And I've got to say that the biggest barrier isn't between community health services and social services. It tends to be between those two services and hospitals. And what we need, particularly in Shropshire, where we've got a virtually 30% of the population is over 65. I kind of must disagree with the picture that everything's been rosy this summer, this winter, because we've seen in the national press A&E under massive stress. We've seen the NHS under big pressures around GP waiting lists, waiting a week to get a GP. So we do need a solution, and that solution around integrated health and social care is about a single point of contact. How you can actually restructure the service, and you've got to do it in two ways. And the National Care Service that the Labour Party and Andy Burnham team are proposing is actually an integration of budgets. But it's on two levels. It's on a strategic level, so it gives a much stronger powers to the local authorities based within the health and welfare boards to have a strategic overview of how you organise your services across health and social care. And secondly, you need an operational, because if you ask me how you do it, what you need to do is you need to sit nurses, social workers, doctors, you need to sit them in the same room. My experience leads me to believe that the only way to actually have an integrated service is to have people working together to actually provide that single point of contact. So what we would need, what we would have would be a strategic approach to a single budget, which would then break down these barriers between the persons in hospital and yet they're what's described as a delayed discharge, or sometimes very negatively described as a bed blocker. And the reason that they're a delayed discharge is because, for example, in Shropshire, we've seen £23 million cut from an £80 million budget for adult social care. So of course, people are delayed discharges in hospital because it's not an integrated system. The seamless service, it's not there. So we need to start again with an integrated service with a single point of contact, a national care service. The Labour Party have committed themselves to providing an additional 20,000 nurses, 8,000 additional doctors. We're going to have 3,000 more midwives. We're going to have a mansion tax which is going to fund this. This is fully funded proposals that are going to be about how we produce a complete radical overhaul of how the NHS and adult social care services can be restructured as a single point, a single service that meet people's needs much more effectively.
Tom Thorne.
Absolutely. First of all, yeah, it's great to be here tonight. Thanks all for coming. Owen mentioned that not all parties are committed to the integration of these two services. The Lib Dems are. We've been talking about this for almost 20 years now, and it's something that's just really, really important to us. And this government, led, I think, by the Lib Dem Care Minister Norman Lamb, has done a huge amount in terms of integration. We're not there yet, but it's done a huge amount. I think one of the best examples of this is something called the Better Care Fund. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Better Care Fund. But what it does, it provides £5.3 billion in joint budgets to ensure that health and social care services are commissioned together. I think this is really, really important. Norman Lamb himself says that too often care is uncoordinated, leaving many people needlessly going back to A&E again and again. By getting local health and care teams working together to focus particularly on prevention, not just the treatments, we can stop families and the NHS from having to pay the price for these unnecessary crises. And I think that's really, really important. Not only is there a huge cost to families of the fact that these two services aren't integrated. But also it does actually cost us as a country a huge amount. And so this Better Care Fund will serve to do both. It will serve to help make sure that families have the best care possible, be it social or health, but also that the country can actually save money. You know, it's good for human beings and it's good for the public purse, this Better Care Fund. But going forward, so that's what we've done in government, and the Lib Dems led on that. Norman Lamb, the Care Minister, the Lib Dem led on that. But going forward, the Lib Dems have got real plans that I think are really, really exciting for the integration. We've got a record of bringing in these decisions. And a couple of things we're going to do. So building on the model that Norman Lamb's brought in, we've set out a duty for local areas to agree commissioning plans and pool the whole of the health and care budget. What this, we believe, will do is allow services to be more joined up around patients and provide care closer to home. What it would also do is remove the inefficiencies caused by maintaining two separate systems and improve the quality of care. Another little thing I want to mention, which I think was mentioned in the question actually, is the fact we've got an ageing population. It can't be ignored. At the moment, over 10 million people in the UK are over 65. It's projected there'll be another 5.5 million elderly people in 20 years' time, and that number will have doubled to almost 20 million by 2050. And this is why I think that we don't need short-term 5-year plans. What we need is a long-term plan. Because sort of starting a plan and seeing it broken up again and another government comes in is no good. The ageing population needs to be addressed, and the way we do that is with a long-term plan. And I believe really strongly that the Lib Dems model, setting out a duty for local areas to agree commissioning plans and pool the whole budget, is the way to do that. If you vote Lib Dem in this election, what you're going to get is a party committed to the fair integration of these two systems. And I really hope that you'll support me and support the party in those ambitions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming here and giving me a chance to talk to you. I'll try and answer the question as best as I can, given that our manifesto hasn't actually been published yet. But UKIP wants to increase the level of integration between health and social care, and uniquely wants to bring it back under the control of the NHS. And the funding will be merged into one social care fund, and hopefully that will lead to a more joined up thinking approach. We intend to invest £3 billion into the health service, providing 20,000 new nurses, 3,000 new midwives and 8,000 GPs. And we will also invest an extra £130 million per year, that's £650 million per annum by 2020, into dementia research funding. That's particularly important with an ageing population. We also intend to end PFI privatisation. Unlike the other parties, we actually can afford to do this without increasing the deficit and increasing the national debt by borrowing, because we're going to scrap the vanity project of HS2, reduce the overseas aid budget by some £9 billion, leaving just enough to fund disaster relief, inoculation programmes against preventable diseases, and for the funding of infrastructure projects delivered by British firms to provide clean water and sanitation. There will be further funds available when we're able to leave the EU and no longer have to pay in huge sums every year, including unexpected demands of £1.7 billion because our prostitutes and drug dealers are doing better than expected. And also, once we're able to control who comes into our country and insist that migrants have health insurance as well as a job and housing, because they meet the skills criteria of an Australian-style points-based immigration system, we'll be able to save further money by ending health tourism.
It's been submitted by the Senior Citizens Forum. Thinking about the current caps contained within the Care Act, when the reality becomes common knowledge that these can only have a negative impact on ordinary families, might it encourage younger generations to forego prudence, for example, live in rented accommodation and spend rather than save? And we'll kick off with Duncan Kerr for the Green.
It's a very sound question. I think the questioner, whoever it is who's put that question together, has got some real insight into what's going to happen with this care cap. So just to recap what's proposed at the moment is that you will have to pay for your costs of care up to £75,000. £72,000, I've been corrected by my right. That doesn't actually necessarily mean £72,000 because that £72,000 is set by the local authority's rates. And in Shropshire, there's a huge campaign called the Toxic Top-Ups campaign, where an increasing number of people can't find suitable residential accommodation at the rate set by the council. They have to pay more. And if you have to pay more, you might well pay a lot more than £72,000. You'll only get the £72,000 at the local authority rates. Also doesn't include your actual cost of food and accommodation. So on top of the £72,000, you'll be paying £12,000 a year for the cost of food and accommodation as well. So just think who this actually benefits. Let's say that you're one of the fortunate 1% in the country who have net assets of, say, £3 million, because that's what 1% of the country do actually have. If you've got those sorts of net assets, well, hey, it's Christmas. You've only committed to actually have to spend £72,000 or thereabouts. For the majority of people who haven't got anything like that sort of assets, who have got assets around £72,000 or £100,000, you're going to spend all of it. It doesn't help the ordinary person at all. And on a day when we've heard an awful lot about how much the government today wants to help the ordinary working person, here's a very specific proposal which doesn't help the ordinary working person one iota. It only helps those who are very wealthy, who can afford this and then can afford the insurance to guarantee their situation as well. So I have to say, go back to my earlier answer, the way around this is free social care for the elderly. Scotland can do it. It costs in Scotland about 500 million. They've got about 1/10 of our population. It would cost us about 5 billion. We're spending 50 billion on HS2, which the Green Party is opposed to, by the way. We're spending up to 100 billion on a targeted nuclear weapon system, which we hope never to use. We can afford 5 billion to look after the elderly people.
Details on your iPad. Owen Patterson, this doesn't help ordinary working people, we've just heard.
Well, this is a real conundrum for all future governments, because it's a happy story that we're living a lot longer and we're going to have a lot more elderly people, and as technology improves and medicine advances, this will become a real pressing problem. And as a government, we launched a very serious, detailed consultation on this issue, and came up with the Care Act, which proposed a cap of maximum £72,000. But Duncan's absolutely right, it doesn't cover all costs, and it's not a perfect solution. I'm very interested in the views that might come out of the audience as to how we do handle this problem, which is going to get more difficult. Where I have to disagree with Duncan, there is no such as free anything. And I'm afraid I'm getting back to a brutal, ghastly fact, which I'll repeat several times this evening. It's the one fact we'll remember. It is that when we came into government in 2010, this country was borrowing £300,000 a minute.
Rubbish.
We cannot go on borrowing £300,000 a minute. Every one of us in this room would have wonderful projects we'd like to spend government taxpayers' money on. But before we get too overexcited, we are still borrowing £200,000 a minute. We have begun to control public spending, but there is not a limitless pot. Now, this government actually has put more money, a lot more money, above inflation. It's about 12 billion, 7 billion over inflation, and we promised another, Tazoli promised another 8 billion yesterday to come out of growth. But we have to look at the fact we cannot promise everything, and this problem of the elderly having to sell their houses off has vexed all previous governments in recent years, and it's accelerated. And it's one of the issues I had quite a lot of correspondence about. Now, my view is that the Care Act is not perfect. The 72,000 number is a figure. It gives relief to a very large number of people, but as Duncan says, it doesn't cover all the costs. There will have to be some contribution. Where I would entirely agree with Duncan, he might be horrified by this, is that we have actually a national disease service at the moment. And the trick is to make it a national health or national disease prevention service. There is masses more we can do to stop people getting ill earlier. And I find it extraordinary we don't do more about diagnostics. So I just touched on earlier, I have these 2 monthly meetings with all the main health providers. I got one of the leading providers in the world of diagnostics. And it was absolutely fascinating that if we were all screened, if every one of us in this room was screened, we could head off some of the acute problems coming down the track at the pass before they become acute. And that would be a massive, massive gain. So the whole talk about health, all about money, it's not, I said on the radio last night, it's not just pouring a fixed volume of water into a jug. It's how you spend the money. And I think that this idea of prevention is something we should be really looking at. There have been massive advances in diagnostics, and we could do an awful lot more analysing people right through from their 20s, stopping them getting to an acute stage where they cost an absolute fortune, and making their lives longer and happier. And for the elderly, the real trick, and I do think we should praise the council here, keeping people at home. I can't think any one of us in this room wants to end our days in a care home if we could spend it in our own home, if at all possible. And I think that is the real trick, is to see how, given the constraints, and there will be constraints on budgets, we can keep as many people at home as possible by much better, more forward-thinking preventative care.
Well, just to put it in context, the Care Act changes that came into force in England on the 1st of April apply only to the care system for older people and younger adults with disabilities, and they introduced 4 major changes. The creation of national eligibility criteria, establishing for the first time when someone should be entitled to help. To date, it's been up to councils to set their own criteria. A duty on councils to offer schemes by which those who need to pay for residential care can get a loan from their local council, which is then paid back from their estate after death. Giving carers for the first time the same right to assessment and support as the people they care for, and before they had to provide, quote, substantial care on a regular basis, unquote, to get an assessment. And those who paid for care themselves were entitled to go to councils to get advice and information about the care system. And as we found out, to help protect people's assets, a cap on care costs that they have to pay for is set at £72,000 for the over 65s. Now, that does mean that people will be having to pay quite a lot for their care. It could be a substantial amount for their care. And that's very much of a problem for elderly people. But I do agree with the questioner who says that isn't this encouraging people not to be prudent? Why would you save, and why would you have assets if they're going to be stripped off you? And I think it's important that we shouldn't be sending a message that it's not worth your while to be prudent, and it's not worth your while to take care to provide for your own future. There's been a growing trend to neglect those people who could have been said to follow desirable behaviour. For instance, if you're a saver, the value of your savings has been decimated, whereas if you've got debts, then the value of your debts is low interest rates have made it much easier for you to pay them. We've encouraged 50% of our students to go to university. When they graduate, they have a huge debt, so telling them, yeah, getting into debt is fine. Sometimes they're struggling to get a job, and perhaps it would have been better off, they would have been better off and more successful if they'd been given an opportunity for a different career. Perhaps if they'd gone for vocational training, they wouldn't be burdened with a huge debt and unable to get a job as a graduate. There should be no stigma attached to being successful tradesmen, although I have noticed some politicians don't look down on any white van man, because they don't think he's quite PC enough. And the benefit system has favoured those parents who split up rather than those who stay together. And research has shown that a stable two-parent family provides much better outcomes for children. So I think the questioner was right to say that we're not encouraging younger generations to be prudent. When it comes to stick and carrot, sometimes the carrot is for people who have, shall we say, less desirable outcomes in their behaviour, and the stick is used to be those people who have done what many people would consider to be the right thing.
Tom Thorne from the Liberal Democrats. This is a policy that encourages or might encourage the younger generation to forego premiums.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick on something Andrea said on this. You mentioned at the start when she was outlining it that it only offers a cap to the elderly people, which is not strictly true. Actually, there's a little sub-clause that is fought for by the Lib Dems, which actually secures a zero cap for costs for people under 25. So it's quite nice to see it balanced. But I think I've got to echo in some way what Owen said. We do want to strike the right balance here between supporting people and paying for care and managing the public purse in a sensible, sustainable way. I think the 72,000 cap is not perfect. It's important to mention there is also an extended means test up to £118,000. So if you have assets up to £118,000, you qualify for some financial help. I think it achieves some sort of balance. It's not perfect, but it does achieve the right balance. It's actually a really significant commitment by this government. And again, I would say this, but it's been pushed for by the Lib Dems. Under the old system, people with assets of less than £23,000 were entitled to financial help. And that figure is now 118,000. And that is actually a transformative piece of legislation to take people out. You know, I personally saw my grandmother was in the care home, the Elmhurst care home, some of you might know it, it's not far away from here. And she was forced to sell her own home to pay for her care. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen anything more heartbreaking than seeing my grandmother sign the deeds away on her home to pay for her care. I know how much this brutally cuts into families, and it's a real tough issue. But like I say, I think the 72,000 cap and the extended means test of 118,000 does go some way to achieving this balance. But more needs to be done, and I'd like to see the next government, whoever they are, have a look at seeing what we can do to possibly raise this cap. In many ways, it's a compromise. But more needs to be done, and the Lib Dems have fought throughout this government to protect local authority budgets against the wishes of the Conservatives to slash. And that's a pledge that the party's happy to make again. You know, whoever we're in coalition with, if you vote for Lib Dems, then we will make sure that the funding is there to try and do something about this, because it divides families, it divides communities. Something needs to be done, and if you choose to elect me as your MP, it's something I will fight for, because I've seen firsthand it destroy families, so I will fight for this if you elect me.
I really think this is I completely agree with Owen that this is not an issue for a party political argy-bargy, and it's a really difficult issue that needs across the parties that needs to be solved. Some personal experience from me, one of the things I do a number of different roles since I was made redundant by Shropshire Council, when the Joint Commission team was closed, when the budgets disappeared to different directions anyway. One of the things I do is I do visits for the court's protection, and that's off, and a lot of those visits will be to children and older people with dementia who lack capacity to manage their finances, and their families have had to go to the court to get permission to manage their funds, and often the only reason that they've had to do that is so that they can effectively sell the property to fund care. And it's absolutely heartrending to see it. There's 20,000 people a year, and that's the figure that I understand, that have to sell their properties in order to fund long-term care in residential nursing homes. And it is a disgrace, really. The Dilnap Commission that was set up, wasn't set up by the coalition and was supported by Labour, originally proposed a cap of 36. So that's where the 72 comes from, because it was doubled. Dilnap originally proposed 36, but that was bumped up. The situation, the Care Act has got a number of different components. There's actually some really good interesting things in the Care Act. There's, I think it's good that the focus on individual well-being. There are some issues, the way it takes on board some of the mid-staffs, the Francis report and the problems in mid-staffs. but to just focus in on effectively the changes to financial assessments for care. Yes, what it's done is, Tom's right, it's right now, if you go into care and your needs are primarily for social care, they're not, and not healthcare needs, you will have to fund your care 100% if you've got over £23,250. This cap, which will kick in 2016, actually has a sliding scale between 17 and 118, but it means that the maximum that you can pay for the care is the 72,000. It's still twice what Dilnot proposed, and I'm not happy with it. I think it's too much. The people that I see, it protects virtually nothing of the property values that the person have got. And what I want to see is something, a fairer system that's going to reflect that we must incentivise people to save for the future. And I think the principle of this question is correct. We do need to work out a fair way to pay care that shares the responsibility across. The current situation is that only those individuals who need the care have to pay for it. I think we need to share it more. I guess it's what the Labour Party is about, a more collective, sharing approach. I would think that I would want the cap to be lower, and I'd want to find a way of moving towards a system that is less punitive on people who go into care. Just one last point around prevention, which is absolutely the key. One of the problems with prevention, of course, is if you look at some of the things that have happened with it proposes the Care Act. I need to point out, let's not confuse the Care Act with the Health and Social Care Act, because let me be clear that the Labour government, when it's elected, will repeal the Health and Social Care Act, which is about privatisation of the NHS. This is the Care Act, not the Health and Social Care Act. One of the things it changed in terms of assessments is it moved the fair access to care changes, and it made it so that it identified outcomes, and it talked about you would meet the criteria if you have 2 outcomes. And what worries me is some of these outcomes are pretty difficult to think that you need 2. Managing and maintaining nutrition, maintaining personal hygiene, managing toilet needs, being appropriately clothed, being able to make use of the adult's home safely. There's a whole series, and you've got to meet at least 2 of those. And I'm trying to work out what happens if you can't manage your toilet needs. You're not going to meet the criteria for this new assessment. So I'm kind of worried about it. And also in Shropshire, in terms of prevention, we see in Shropshire the lowest funding for adult social care anywhere in the country. Yes, there is some fantastic work done by some very dedicated staff within the care sector, but that's the facts in Shropshire. We've got an ageing population, and we've got the lowest proportion of funding for adult social care. We've seen this council close day centres by the back door. Basically, what they've done is they introduced charges of £70 to £80 a day, so of course people don't use them. So the argument is that they're not necessary because people don't want to use them. And those people and we've got an age-concerned voluntary sector system that can't cope because they're not set up to have personal care day services. So what's actually happening is, because we're seeing those cuts to adult social care, we are seeing people going into long-term care and then having to go through this horrendous process of financial assessment, where of course if you're in domiciliary care, you don't have your house assessed as costs. The other thing to point out, the Shropshire Council currently is doing a consultation about how it's going to implement the Care Act, and there's some really worrying things in there.
Graham, you're on your one last point.
Okay, the last point I'll say is, they're talking about potentially being able to assess not just the value of your property, but also the value of possessions. So I think that it looks like we're going to have to train social workers to be valuing antiques, or you better look out where your Ferrari is, because they're going to take that into account as well.
All right, thank you very much. which is a mammoth question, so I will take a deep breath. Britain's MPs have betrayed the people over more than 4 decades and have given vital powers to the EU without consent of the electorate. There is the